Yeah, I'm sure we can get somebody. I mean, they seem very given that. So I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure we can get somebody. I mean, they seem very given that. So I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure we can get somebody. I mean, they seem very given that.
Lately, it seems every passing second brings news of another climate-driven disaster. But we still have the power to turn back the clock. Harnessing the power of collective human energy, today's university students are working together to chart a new future, demanding and creating the solutions for a sustainable climate. Our focus in science, engineering, activism, and politics offers the potential of a better tomorrow for all of us. Tune in to Campus Climate Corps for news of what is and what is not happening at this year's UN Climate Conference. Prepare for a livable tomorrow with a life and career of action. Join us and become part of the solution.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome each and every one of you to Campus Climate Corps Day 11. Day 11. Our folks on the ground at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt are here to bring you all the news, all the interviews, all the content that you're looking to see, amplify your voices as we have been over the last week and a half almost. So we're so glad to have them on the ground bringing you the materials that you're looking for. Today, we have some interesting news to share. Starting with the fact that President Biden met with President Xi of China and essentially pushed a reset button on their mutual relations. This is coming at the G summits right now in Bali, which is a pretty big deal, honestly, because Biden and President Xi came together and essentially said, we need to get this COP27 thing moving, as you know, as well as resetting our relations, because we are the two pillars right now who are essentially increasing a significant amount of the carbon emissions of the world. So the fact that it's the two of us that need to work together to solve those emissions is a pretty big deal. So I think that's a pretty fantastic piece of news. We also have a couple of interviews being done on the ground by our team right now in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, by our very own Esteban. But Before we begin, I'd like to welcome each and every one of you. As always, my name is Rock Abajadi Jr., reporting live from Gainesville, Florida, with the rest of our team on the ground in Egypt. Esteban, Michael Fiddler, Dr. John Capiz, Val Hawley, and the rest of the team. Again, welcome, and let's go ahead and get started with some content. Esteban, it looks like I have some information from you right now. It seems that you got an interview with someone from Yale. Why don't you give us a little bit of background about that?
Hello, lost you for a minute.
How's the internet connection over there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
It's very bad. It's as bad as it has ever been. Yes.
Okay. Well,
Let's
why don't we
make
just
use
go
of
ahead
the-
and share your interview with the person from Yale?
Oh, yes, by all means,
Okay.
please.
Good morning, everyone. We're here with Melanie Quigley, Executive Director of Strategic Initiatives from Yale School of the Environment.
Hello.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me.
So we were wondering what in particular is Yale showcasing at its pavilion?
Yeah, so we have a booth here this week at COP27, and we're excited to be hosting 30 students from all across campus, masters, undergrads, and PhD students. And when the students are here, before they get here, they take a course called International Organizations and Conferences, where they get to meet leaders of these UN systems and learn about systems change and leadership. And they also, while they're here, support delegations that need their support. So they're writing climate briefs, policy briefs, following negotiations, loss and damage, Article 6, supporting pavilions, all those things, and we kind of throw them into the deep end so they can learn by doing. And it's been a really rich and rewarding experience for them to be able to learn about what these systems in UN look like.
Wonderful. So you also told me that your students have access to particular speakers and within this course?
Yeah, so we've been really fortunate to have a really strong alumni base that also run a lot of delegations while they're here. But in the class, we also have ex-executive secretaries and current executive secretaries, including Elizabeth Marema, who is running the COP15 in Montreal in a couple of weeks, who comes and speaks. Julia Marton-Lefebvre, the former Secretary General, I don't want to get any of these wrong, of IUCN, people that have studied the UNEP systems, and Sue Beniaz, who's a climate negotiator under Kerry.
Wonderful. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me.
You know, it certainly doesn't surprise me that Yale has a bunch of alumni running around all over COP27. But hopefully, Esteban, you got to meet a few of them and essentially see what they were planning. Did you get to meet any of the students from Yale who were running around or not?
Not yet. Most of their work also has been contributions to the delegations of different countries and their materials for negotiations. I did get to meet students from Cornell. Actually, the student that we interviewed last week from Cornell was from a very similar program at her school, and she in particular contributed to the delegation of the Kingdom of Tonga. But unfortunately not. I haven't met yet some of the Yale students. Will try to follow up with an interview with them.
Absolutely. Speaking of students, and maybe we can segue. This is a nice segue into protesting. So I recently read an article that, despite the fact that this is being held in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, climate protesters are still taking the stage, despite the fact that even Greta Thunberg and other major protesters like her aren't attending COP27. Youth are still shining on the stage here in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. There are plenty of students out there protesting, making their views known, getting to hopefully to change it upon the inside. So I'm curious if Val Hawley, what do you have to say about how the youth are running around and protesting before we showcase any of our material?
Yeah, the youth are still going strong. Still very impressive, especially the fact that Greta isn't here. And also in Koi, all of the opening statements. I swear to God, I needed to have a Greta counter for quotes. Aside from that, it's been there's been a lot of activity, and I can speak really only majorly on the indigenous activity. I know how the youth online are feeling. There's a lot more news, especially with what's happening in Iran, um, with the threats of those mass executions, and now news coming out about the like torture and the executions in Ukraine from Russian troops. Um, and of course, there's been more talk about just what it's like to be in Egypt or to be Egyptian and to be a youth here. Um, but today, Esteban actually told me about a protest regarding missing and murdered Indigenous women, and that happened earlier on in the day. And then there was another one later on in the afternoon that I actually got to catch. Um, and that's been a huge issue for natives, especially in Turtle Island being like North America. And there's a lot of talk about that. For those who don't know, MMIW, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, it's a big movement because of the statistics of the violence against Native women in the United States, and how we are usually victims of sexual assault, rape, being murdered, or just being kidnapped or going missing. It happens at a lot higher rates than a lot of other communities. And that's partially attributed to man camps in the US. So when fossil fuel companies go in and they set up for whatever they're doing, drilling, mining, they usually set up a place where their workers can stay. And because so many fossil fuel companies go and extract on or near native lands, that's where those man camps are. And that's where so much violence against Native women happens. And because, as with just about every Black and Brown community in the US, how they're never taken seriously by the police forces, a lot of these cases are left opened, or they are never talked about. They're swept under the rug. And there's no help from, it's really hard to get help from police departments to find these women. And it's usually just never taken seriously. It's always a big community issue. And you'll see, especially if you have any Native folks on social media, you'll probably see how a lot of them will post about missing Indigenous peoples. And there are never posts from like actual police departments or anything. It's always just the community trying to find these people, and they are rarely found, which is terribly sad. So along with the huge list of basic asks that I'm hearing at this year's COP, the raising awareness for missing and murdered Indigenous women is another one of those asks that just shouldn't be an ask. And of course, not just women, but Two-Spirit peoples and people of all genders. And that's another thing about Gender Day. Of course, I didn't attend many talks regarding gender, but I was looking back on all the talks that were happening, especially because in the app you can go and click on the Gender Day and see like a list of topics that are relating to it. They were all about women, and you never hear anything about transness in these conversations. But you hear it from the crowds. So the people attending, or at least a lot of them, are very aware, but none of the speakers ever touch on trans people from what I've seen. So hopefully that's something I'll see more of later on, but it's definitely a little strange. Aside from all of that, there were a lot of, it's weird, the different talks you attend and who's organizing them. It's weird seeing the vibes change, you know? So you go to the Indigenous Pavilion and you go to these groups that are super progressive and radical and very like the land back groups and everything, talking about MMIW, talking about the destruction of Native communities. And there's a very big energy there of decolonialize and decolonizer and just very traditional thinking, which happens to be fairly progressive. Um, and they're not very refined. It's a big topic and it's a big issue, of course, but there isn't a very high level of professionalism. Not that that's necessary for these talks, but when you compare it to some of the other talks, like I attended a talk today all about innovative solutions, and it was very technology based, and it was a lot of old dudes on a panel talking about technology, and they were all experts in their fields. And while they were all very smart individuals, um, I could feel specifically how it catered towards a very specific audience. It felt like nearly futuristic, the way they were talking about solutions, even though they weren't saying much, um, especially compared to pavilions like the Japan Pavilion and how they have really groundbreaking solutions and technologies they're revealing. But this panel that I went to, honestly, a big point of it was to not depend and focus on these new technologies coming out, but to use what we already have. Um, but it still felt super professional. And it sort of, at one point, they even mentioned indigenous peoples, just like they just said the word and then they got it over with. They got in their quota. But one person, the moderator, mentioned diversity in this like long list of D's they had about technology. And it was kind of funny how she mentioned diversity, because for anybody, this is going to be a departure, but for anybody who has seen The Wolf of Wall Street, if you remember when he was being interviewed, and he was asked, Jordan Belfort was asked, what do you see the future of Stratton Oakmont as? And he says one word: diversification. That's what it felt like. It there wasn't like major radical language. And honestly, those talks, it felt so weird from an indigenous lens, where so many indigenous peoples are just asking to like leave us alone, just let us do what we've been doing for centuries, because that's what works and that's what will save the planet. And these people are saying we need to get technology everywhere, widespread, and basically just like, it felt very clean, and it was a strange and stark contrast between what I usually attend. But aside from that departure, getting back to your question, there has been a lot of youth activity, which is amazing. And a lot more protests are happening at the actual venue. Nothing of a large scale, but it's definitely good to see it happening now. And I was lucky enough to see a panel talk by one of my friends from the States, a Native woman from the States. And she was talking about hydroelectric dams and alternative solutions, rather than depending on dams that destroyed her communities and continued to destroy communities across the world. So that was really amazing. And afterwards, she held a little like circle, and there was just a moment of community. So the youth definitely have a voice, and they are using it. And it was never about those big speakers, those big people who started the movement, started it. It's not about what Greta says, although she did amazing work. We don't need that. We are all acting, and no matter who it is, whether it's somebody who has billions of followers and created an organization that was worldwide, or if it's this one girl from a tribe in Northern California, all of our voices are being used, and whether or not they're heard, there's always going to be somebody who's there and trying to uplift it. So that's one thing that makes me feel a little bit better about the youth presence.
Absolutely. I think you brought up a couple of really good points, including the fact that climate protesters and climate activists are also human rights activists. I do believe that the issue will need to be discussed in the same circles together, as anyone affected by the climate crisis will typically also see a decrease in their rights as well. As we know, when push comes to shove, humans will always look out for themselves first, just to the way that we're built. But if we solve this crisis together at the very beginning, we don't need to get to that stage, which just goes to show that, again, climate protesters and human rights activists, this is cut from the exact same cloth. That being said, we are going to showcase to you some actual protesting, which did go to show both lengths, both the human rights and the climate protesting angles on both sides. So we'll go ahead and showcase this material here.
You have a choice. You have a choice to make right now. At the moment, we have seen no conversation around zero emissions. Our negotiators in there are telling us all they're hearing is that there is zero empathy, there is zero compassion. For many of us, we are fatigued. We are tired. We are tired of fighting. We are tired of seeing no action. If you want something to come out of this, then there has to be an end to fossil fuels. We need to see phase out of fossil fuels in the common text this year if you are serious about getting us on a pathway towards 1.5. I'm sorry. Fossil fuel out! Fossil fuel out! When I say for people and planet, you say fossil fuel out! For people and planet! Fossil fuel out! For people and planet! Fossil fuel out!
Our sacred site, Chaco Canyon, is a World Heritage UNESCO site, much like the pyramids of Egypt, but they are under attack because of the fossil fuel extraction that is encroaching on our sacred places. We indigenous people are not separate from the land. We are not separate from the water, and we are not separate from our air. We have resisted colonialism since first contact. I'm here wearing my traditional clothing as a relic of the values that my indigenous peoples have. We are fighting against the fossil fuel industries that are lining their pockets with the resources that are stolen from our landscape. They are not only stealing our precious relatives, but they are also stealing our sisters, because fossil fuels also brings in oil and gas workers, men. That is man camps. Man camps are stealing, kidnapping, and desecrating the sacredness of our women. If you were here earlier, you would see all of our indigenous sisters wearing red to remind the fossil fuel corporations that they are stealing our women, and we are saying no more.
Good morning. We are here with Farouk Tariq. He's one of the leaders of today's protest. How do you do?
Okay, fine, thank you. How do you do?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having us. So we were wondering if you could provide to our audience a little bit of the context of your protest and what organization do you belong to, your objectives.
I am from Pakistan Kisan Rabta Committee, which is Pakistan Peasants Coordination Committee, part of Asian People's Movement on Debt and Development, APMDD. I came here from Lahore to protest on the issue of these devastating floods, and also the rains which has taken over almost 1/3 of Pakistan, and that has made life of over 33 million people miserable. They were impacted by this climate disaster. So we came here to raise several issues. Today issue was really fossil fuel, and I come from a country where fossil fuel over 64% energy is being produced by fossil fuels, and only 6% by renewable energy. So Pakistan has been dependent on LNG, on gas, on oil, and on coal. So these are all providing this fossil fuel bad impact on the people's life. So that's what I came here to raise the issue, that government should change and change their priority from fossil fuel to renewable energy.
Wonderful. And the protest today, was it just one organization, or was
No,
it a
no.
group of
It was
organizations?
a group of organizations who are all together against fossil fuel, and this was a joint demonstration. And we had a demonstration yesterday as well, and before as well. So every day we are protesting here because this is the only opportunity we can bring our message to a wider audience. People are listening, but a lot of filming is been made, and through social media
Yes.
and through media, our message is spread. So what we can't do inside, we are doing outside.
Can you do you recall some of the organizations that are involved in this protest?
Yes, there is a fossil fuel. There is a global network on climate change. There is a fossil fuel free world, and there is a Asian People's Movement on Debt and Development, which many organizations are part of that organization, and several other from Africa and from America, and there was a Polish organization as well.
One more follow-up question. So, have you encountered difficulties in protesting in Egypt?
Okay, I come from a country which has been ruled by military dictatorship for 32 years, and I have been arrested many times in Pakistan just to raise our voice for democracy. So when I come here where there is no freedom, there is no democracy, and a COP is taking place here, but COP is mainly a talking shop really for the ruling elite. It's not really, it's a greenwash. I don't think anything concrete will come out of it until there is a mass movement inside Egypt and around the world. But the problem is that there was a demonstration which was cancelled in Cairo, permission was withdrawn, and we also see here I can't take name of America, I can't take name of China. I've been warned 2 times today and yesterday why I'm saying IMF, why I'm saying World Bank. So why can't we say IMF and World Bank? What security it brings that we cannot take name of countries? Those who are polluter, they should be named. Those who are spreading dirty energy, we should name them. And that's the issue here inside, that you don't name, you just say north. North is very broad, very vague term. So is south. Now Saudi Arabia, can we say Saudi Arabia is south? Can we say China is south? But we know American imperialism, we know about their atrocities, but we also have countries in south who are playing the same role what American and British and European imperialism has played. So we are here in a country where there is a dictatorship, where there is no freedom of expression. It's a very limited chance what we can do. Yesterday I was warned why I said US imperialism. Today I just warned when I came out of the thing that your badge can be withdrawn. So let's see what happened, but I said what I have to say. So let's see, we are used to fighting dictatorships, so here I am.
Brilliant. Is there anything you would like to add for our audience?
Yes, I think that a mass movement against fossil fuel has to be built, and also a mass movement against the imperialist exploitation has to be linked with this. All things are linked together. Climate justice, fight against fossil fuel, fight for clean water, fight for a decent life, they're all together. And we are working for a decent, equitable world, and that's the problem, that many of dictatorship who are providing opportunities to the rich become more rich. There are corporate sector who are using every crisis to make more money. So crisis is an opportunity for them to be more rich. So we are here to raise our voices. I hope that our voice has been heard.
Thank you so much.
Excellent interview as always, Esteban. Great job getting the information there. I think he had to bring up a couple of amazing points, and the fact that he was from Pakistan, I think was an excellent opportunity to get an interview from someone from one of them, given the fact that Pakistan right now is almost completely underwater. All of their population right now are suffering from massive floods, which are taking, a lot of the nation by storm, literally and figuratively. So excellent job getting the interview from him. he was right that it was extremely important for the rest of the world to also be protesting, despite the fact that his country might be experiencing some of the worst effects of climate change. It'll take the rest of us to help get Pakistan out of those issues. Rhonda asks a really good question, which is, how can people with no rights focus on climate? Speaking as somebody who right now is in a developed nation, it's really hard to emphasize how easy it is for someone from a developing nation to get out there and protest. But I think this fellow really does highlight and showcase that despite the fact that you may live in a country that's not under a democratic regime, there's still the opportunity to go out there and protest, even if you are getting thrown into prison. As many of you know, I am Lebanese, and Lebanon right now is experiencing one of the worst effects of a downturned economy, autocratic regime, elections that actually mean nothing. And, coming from that background also does showcase that, Lebanese students are out there protesting too. Last year, we had an excellent interview or an excellent showcase of a bunch of Lebanese students who came up and said, listen, we're out there protesting. This isn't just about our economy. This is also about the fact that Lebanon is experiencing a major drought right now. And we're okay getting thrown into prison. We really are, because there's nothing more important right now than salvaging our own future. So I think that, all the courage really does belong to those who are willing to risk everything to get thrown into prison. And this even goes for some of the students in Iran right now, too. If you're looking on some of those signs, some of them are written, that climate is also just as important to some of those students as protesting against the regime that is cracking down on students, on young people, on old people, on anyone who disobeys the regime. So all the courage really does go out to them, and our hearts are definitely with them today. But maybe on to some more interesting topics, with regard to Michael's photos for some of you who are watching our program today. Michael, what have you got to make me jealous today?
Oh, I have few photos. Not so sure that they will make you jealous, but some of them might. Let's have a look and then decide.
Sounds good to me.
So here we go. This will be the first image of the day. I was greeted by this protester, and since she was having a sign with President Sisi, I was not really sure what was going on because the police officers left her alone. So I was just wondering, listen what she was saying, and it turned out that she was saying all the time, "I love Sisi. He's the best guy in the world. I love Sisi." I don't know what else to add to this image. Simply, she loves Sisi. So let's go with that. Then I was greeted by the group of the vegetarians. They also had a press conference today, but they do the same thing every day. Once getting in, there was a first crowd of the protesters that probably where Esteban took his recorded his interview earlier today because he was there 30 minutes prior to me. So this is where another protest in the same area took place. The topics were very similar to what Esteban talked about. You can see some determination in these faces. That's the face says it all. I don't really need to add anything else to that. Yet another example of a dedication to the cause. There is a permanent tattoo on this girl which says climate justice now. So it's really a lifetime mission for some of these people. Topic-wise, today COP was about 2 or 3 main topics. It was about ACE and civil society, and also it was an energy day. This will be a shot from the US pavilion with the content there. I also get an idea that there is an overlap of topics because some of the sessions were simply led by ladies. So it felt like the gender day, like it was yesterday. But since it was about the civil society, I headed to the civil society pavilion. But there was not much going on that I could really enjoy because it was all in Arabic today. I did not understand a single word. So just took few photos there, and that was about it what I could get from that pavilion. Then headed to the Brazilian pavilion, and if I was having a pavilion here myself, I definitely would not want to have it next to the Brazil because it's so loud and they play music. There might be even karaoke. They were just playing a lot of music today. So it's definitely the noisiest pavilion at COP. There were many indigenous people walking by today. I have seen many of them, probably the highest number so far. Here I took few shots in the US pavilion and they were meeting some of the delegates there. And this would be a shot from one of the pavilions, which was where the session was aimed at the ACE, the ACE. In the morning, I did not really know what it stands for. So then I realized it's an action on climate empowerment. And when I ask you people on the bus, what is this ACE about? Nobody really knows. So it's some sort of a new abbreviation. So not much I can report on ACE. I think that the major topic today for most of the pavilions was energy, because simply energy. So this will be a shot from the Swedish pavilion, and they were discussing how to store energy and combine heat and power for sustainable agriculture. This is just a shot of one of the laptops that was playing the background for this show. Then for some reason, their pavilion started to fall apart. So people had to show up, or the technicians had to show up, and they brought a drill to fix it. The most interesting exhibition or presentation I experienced today was was about fusion. That was a hot topic, and it was very interesting. What they were saying there was that we are getting closer to the stars much more than what we would have expected a few years ago. So there is some major development in the fusion area being done. So let's hope it will somehow work out. Just a quick glimpse into the Japanese pavilion. They always go with the topic. So all sessions were on energy. It was very nicely arranged, just like you would expect from the Japanese pavilion. And the most artistic pavilion of the day I have seen today is definitely the pavilion of Turkey. They have some art which is created from base materials, whether it would be plastic bags or aluminum tins. Here would be a detail of this art. Or here is the image on the left now. These are expired medical tablets. So the art is created this way. Yet another example another image from the Turkish pavilion. And we also got a chance to help with the art. They were giving us pieces of paste and also glue, so we could actually help to build the art, but I simply just took photos. One more shot from the Turkish pavilion is they also have there a bit of a lot of digital art. There is a lot of digitalization or digitalized art going on. Here you could be using some sort of a virtual pointer and having a digital marbling experience. I tried it. It's really very cool technology. Walking around, I also ran into this gentleman in the middle. It's the Dr. Ho-Sung Lee, it's the IPCC chair, one of the scientists I very highly respect. And one of the panelists during the same session was Dr. Abdallah Moqsit, which is IPCC secretary, one of the authors of the weather forecasting and the Aladdin. Got lucky enough to take a few more shots of Dr. Lee. And here would be a general shot from the Qatar pavilion where the presentation took place. I was truly disappointed that the questions these panelists were asked were on the level of maybe high school, and these are really leading authors of the IPCC assessment report. Those are super educated and super smart guys, and they were asked so basic questions. There was a big disappointment there. And finally, I ran into another protest. It was not by the main entrance where most of the protest takes place. This was somewhere in between the pavilions. This was a little bit bigger. I would estimate maybe 200 people there at this protest. They were all watched by these security guys, as you can see on the left. The security guys were keeping their distance, but they were keeping an eye so things don't go out of hand. So there was a lot of power and energy in some of the protesters and speakers. I wanted initially I wanted to end with this image because it's sort of full of energy. But then I saw this girl on the left who was delivering her speech, and she basically had an emotional meltdown. She was crying when she was delivering her speech. And I was not sure whether she was just playing it for the audience or if it was real. But then when she finished, I followed her and I saw her that she was crying for another maybe 20 minutes because it was really, truly emotional for her. So this image would be the last image of the day for today, because there are the emotions of the people who really and truly, truly suffer.
Wow. Great images, Michael, especially towards the end there. I'm really glad that you got both of those, although I'm sure she had a really emotional experience from that speech of hers to break down like that. But I imagine that's happening all over the world, especially in countries where the effects of climate change become more and more and more direct. I think is, one of the major themes that we've been showcasing since we began is many will not understand the effects of climate change until it's right on their very doorstep. Until you see it right in front of you, until you see somebody breaking down, actually emotionally, invested into the process, until you feel the water rising above your ankles, you got to see this in order to fully experience and appreciate what the true effects of climate change are going to be. That being said, we do have another showcase from our very own Dr. John Capice. After that, we'll go into some final thoughts and we'll wrap up today. So I'll let Dr. Capice take it away.
Today, I wanted to cover some of the water issues being discussed here at COP27. First is a session I attended at the Water Pavilion titled Water, Energy, and Climate Nexus. And the second is a follow-up to some of the coverage we had of USAID and U.S. Department of Agriculture programs on climate adaptation and mitigation. But first, I wanted to mention something in the news related to activities here at COP27. After President Biden left COP27, he traveled further east and met with the Chinese president in Bali, Indonesia, at the G20 meeting. And the White House issued a statement saying that President Biden underscored that the United States and China must work together to address transnational challenges, such as climate change, global macroeconomic stability, including debt relief, health security, and global food security, because that is what the international community expects. So first on that list is climate change. And that was also discussed in some news coverage of the US-Chinese meeting, which was characterized as somewhat tense, but climate change was seen as an area of potential cooperation. Now that seems to be hopeful, but as you may have heard in some of our previous coverages, there were a lot of tensions here between the US representatives, our US senators, in particular, and China, and then some of the speeches at the meeting yesterday with the World Bank and the USA and China. So whereas they may be looking towards climate change as a potential bright spot in the relations between the US and China, activities here at COP27 would not necessarily support that. But back to the Water Pavilion presentation. It was led by a representative from a group called CIGR, which is one of the largest, if not the largest, ag research institution in the world. Now, their representative stated that water was at the heart of climate adaptation. In other words, climate change is felt by people throughout the world, largely first through water issues, either flooding, drought, or sea level rise, etc. But she also pointed out that water can make or break mitigation, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And she went into some detail on the role of water in energy transition. But I wanted to make a few observations about this session at the Water Pavilion. First, I noticed some of the sponsors of that came together to host this pavilion, and the U.S. organizations. A couple of them I noted in particular. I've had extensive experience with them and have found them to be highly resistant to climate priorities. And this is in large part due to their close ties to the corporate world and their members, the members of these organizations being derived from the corporate world. And they often have an urban growth mandate to deliver water for development. So they tend to focus on gaining access to more water, delivering more water at a low price, and are not highly inclined to address climate issues unless they are financially incentivized to a high degree. Now, from the developing world perspective, places that suffer from a lack of clean water for drinking and a lack of proper sanitation or wastewater treatment are typically those countries that have severe problems with governance. They may attempt to portray themselves otherwise, but deficiencies in water and sanitation are absolute evidence of a failure of governance at the local all the way up to the national level. So expecting an awful lot of capacity out of such nations, out of such governments to deliver on climate issues is probably expecting far beyond what they're capable of delivering. Now, a lot of the presentations in this session were on our traditional water management issues, but they were put forward with a climate spin. Now, the one area that did have an absolute nexus with water and climate is that of water use in mitigation. In other words, as we try to move away from fossil fuels, we often encounter some practices or energy sources with very high water demands, just as high as with the fossil fuel plants. And those can be things like hydropower, bioenergy, geothermal, and nuclear. So water issues must be considered if we expect some of these other sources of energy to relieve the fossil fuel demands. Now, the other topic I wanted to cover was the references by the U.S. Agency for International Development in some of the agricultural presentations on the U.S. plan for global water security. And this is a relatively new program issued June 1st. Now, the program is a 5-year update on the global water strategy of the United States from 2017 to 2022. So this next 5-year plan attempts to take that experience and improve this U.S. program. 4 of the recommendations based upon prior experience were that these programs needed to go beyond simply providing infrastructure, and they must represent programs and projects that are comprehensive and scalable. In other words, able to be expanded beyond the single demonstration project. And that these programs needed to prioritize local leadership rather than simply importing consultants and U.S. agency staff to implement a project and then leave. Also, these projects now needed to integrate climate resilience into their infrastructure. Also, they needed to increase the coherent implementation across humanitarian development and peace-building contexts. And this is fairly agency-type text, and they say that the whole of government accountability for reducing water-related conflict and incorporating humanitarian and fragility considerations into water security and sanitation partnerships and investment. A little hard to translate that, but I think it means that they need to be mobile and they need to be aware of their local context and emerging conflicts and be responsive to those issues. Now, this is a very large program involving 14 different elements of the U.S. government. It's being led by the Department of State, and the Department of State's primary implementation arm is the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, but other agencies are involved: the Army Corps, U.S. Department of Agriculture, NOAA, even Department of Defense, CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, NASA, the EPA, the U.S. Geological Survey, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, and several trade and development agencies. Now, this is not simply a foreign aid development project. Instead, it's centered around the fact that the global water crisis threatens U.S. national security and prosperity. So they see water and the economic factors, including food, that follow from water as being primary drivers of conflict and instability in the world. And that is increasingly so with the onset of the climate crisis. Now, the elements of this are first, to strengthen water and sanitation sector governance, financing, and institutions, as well as markets. So this is sort of a large-scale institutional perspective on the issue. So they needed to set structures in place and not simply implement individual projects. So more of an approach on the governance side. And then the projects, the programs needed to provide drinking water and sanitation and incorporate hygiene. So what's typically called WASH programs: water, sanitation, and hygiene. The third objective is to improve the climate resilience of all of these programs and to maintain some focus on the freshwater needs of the ecosystem. And fourth, to address the conflict and fragility issues that follow from water management difficulties. Now, along with this, they have a targeted set of nations, and you can see these are primarily clustered in the middle latitudes of Africa. Most of the countries that are facing severe water issues are in that region, but they're not alone. You've got India and Bangladesh facing severe problems, and then several nations in Central America and in South America. Now, each one of these nations has a website. Now, one of the pages was identifying not only the top priorities based upon need, but with an overlay of politics. So a national security priority has been assigned to Jordan, Palestine, and the Gaza Strip for many of these programs. Now, one of the national pages is for Senegal, and each country on that priority list has a page like this, which seeks to describe in brief some of the challenges, the water challenges faced by that nation, and then some of the programs that have been implemented by the United States in cooperation with that government, and where they hope to take these activities in the future. So this provides sort of an overview of some of the water discussions going on here at COP27. And interestingly, we had touched on President Biden in China and Biden's speech given earlier this last week. One of the announcements that was provided in the White House press release and just mentioned briefly by President Biden was a program to deliver to Ukraine small modular nuclear reactors. And these are seen as Generation 4 nuclear facilities that are supposedly much safer and with far less of challenges relative to waste management. Now, unfortunately, I've learned by asking a few people in key position about this program, and they were somewhat a little disappointed in some of the details associated with it, specifically the nature of the technology being used by these initial SMRs. There are a variety of technologies that can be scaled down in size to fit into an SMR configuration, but unfortunately, the one in this Ukrainian proposal is really an old design, more along the lines of the old light water reactors rather than some of the new generation 4 configurations. So it'll be interesting to see how that particular initiative evolves and whether or not this is simply an effort to get whatever technology they can deploy quickly into place and to have a proof of concept that SMRs can be implemented. And then as the new generation SMRs come online, maybe these will be the ones that will be deployed more widely nationally and internationally as part of our efforts to address our evolving energy needs.
I think that Dr. Caprice brings up an excellent point throughout his presentation, and that it is the recurring theme that water really needs to play a massive role in how we address the climate crisis. I did enjoy, of course, his presentation, as always, on how nuclear is a necessary requirement, a necessary component of addressing the climate crisis, because getting to green energy, completely green energy by 2050 is impossible without it. I think any statistic that you look at clearly shows that using only solar power, only hydrogen power, only completely green energy does not reach that point by that point, or it does not reach 2050 by that point. That being said, we are reaching our hour. So if there are any last comments for our presentation today, please do speak now. Anyone have any final comments for our viewers over in the US?
Just that having the interview with Farooq Tariq was quite interesting, and I encourage you to follow, to also read the Guardian article recently published featuring him and other interviewees.
Absolutely. Thank you, Esteban. All right. Well, from Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, and from Gainesville, Florida, we wish you a wonderful day. Stay tuned tomorrow as we come back to you with our Day 12 briefing. And in the meantime, get out there, study hard, protest harder. We'll see you all tomorrow. Take care, everyone.
Lately, it seems every passing second brings news of another climate-driven disaster. But we still have the power to turn back the clock. Harnessing the power of collective human energy, today's university students are working together to chart a new future, demanding and creating the solutions for a sustainable climate. Our focus in science, engineering, activism, and politics offers the potential of a better tomorrow for all of us. Tune in to Campus Climate Corps for news of what is and what is not happening at this year's UN Climate Conference. Prepare for a livable tomorrow with a life and career of action. Join us and become part of the solution.